Salutations, everyone. I am the author and the founder of the Blxck Archive, a true crime podcast that forces us to look at all crimes, but especially those that are living at the dead center of a system. Not in the total dark where they're completely buried, and not blindly covered by mainstream media sensation. We're looking right in the middle where files are public record, yet the deepest and most unsettling truths are simply just not highlighted enough. To truly understand our legal system, its blind spots, and obviously its systematic failures, we have to examine a broad spectrum of cases, and today we're going to be forcing ourselves to look at the devastating reality sitting in the middle space. A reality that should be absolute common sense, yet it somehow qualifies as a radical statement. Women are human beings. When we talk about the system, we aren't just talking about a police report or a courthouse. We're talking about state-dictated censorship, policy loopholes, and institutional apathy. It feels ridiculous to even have to state that out loud. It should be a baseline truth. But if you look at public record, society routinely treats that premise like an open debate. Today we're talking about feminism, and before anyone rolls their eyes, let's clear the air on what the word actually means because people have millions of different definitions about it. Feminism, the word, the actual meaning versus the fiction that has been constructed around it. By definition, feminism is very simple. A very logical, simple belief that women should have equal rights, equal opportunities, and equal human dignity to men. That is literally it. It's a common sense baseline of human equality. At the end of the day, we all are humans, regardless of if we're good or bad. None of us are better than the other. Yet if you listen to the way that a lot of these men, especially those who are holding microphones, algorithms, and political power describe it, they paint feminism as a toxic, aggressive war on masculinity, which is completely stupid in my opinion. They reframe a desperate demand for basic safety and legal autonomy as female drama. They create a cartoon villain out of a movement that is literally just trying to keep women alive. Today, we aren't going to talk about just one isolated incident or one bad actor. We're examining a massive corporate global reality across multiple cases. A young woman in China who was ripped of her bodily autonomy in a hospital ward, to a teenager in Italy hunted by her own family for refusing a forced marriage, or a brilliant activist in Iran assassinated for explicitly demanding equality. Now, even though they might seem disconnected, they're not. They are cases where ordinary women chase the most basic human definition of extraordinary, their own freedom, and pay the ultimate price. In this episode of the Blxck Archive, we're going to pull back the curtains on how global politics is corrupt to its core. World leaders are systematically failing us every day, and no one seems to be really talking about it. Why right now women are trying to make a difference and putting their own lives in danger every single day just by speaking up. By influencers going online and trying to gain clout, saying they aren't a feminist, yet using the same rights that feminism gives them. Before we begin, please note that this episode contains discussions of systematic violence, forced marriage, self-harm, targeted assassinations. It's raw, uncomfortable, and it's happening in plain sight. Let's get into the archive for a second. Content warnings. Systematic violence against women. There are detailed discussions of how institutional and legal systems fail to protect female victims. There's mentions of suicide and self-poisoning driven by extreme societal, cultural, and familiar pressure. Domestic and interpersonal abuse. Discussions about domestic violence, severe domestic control, and forced marriage. Honor-based violence and femicide. Case details regarding honor killings and the premeditated murder of a woman by family members. Now, I want to stop here for a second just because I think honor killings are insane. In a lot of cultures, especially around Asia, they're not just restricted to Asia, I'm just saying that a lot of them happen in Asia. Women are killed for quote-unquote dishonoring their family, and their death is seen as an honor to them because now they just can't do it anymore. Targeted assassinations, discussions of planned executions of women's rights activists and political reformers, medical trauma, references to severe labor distress, and the denial of life-saving medication procedures. The first case we're getting into is the case of Ma Rongrong from Yulin, China. Ma Rongrong was heavily pregnant and she was admitted to the First People's Hospital of Yulin. Doctors examined her and determined that the fetus's head was unusually large, making a natural birth highly dangerous. They recommended instead a C-section, and usually when any family members hear this, they would be ecstatic to see that this poor woman's life could be saved. Because of the crushing cultural and institutional barriers, the situation quickly became fatal. First off, the loss of bodily autonomy. Under Chinese medical regulations at the time, hospital staff were required to get explicit permission from family members before attempting any major surgeries. A woman's own signature was legally treated as a secondary to her husband's or her in-laws. Next, the in-laws' absolute refusal. Hospital records and security footage show that Marong, in agonizing labor pain, repeatedly walked out of the ward to beg her husband and her family to sign the C-section consent form. Her husband and his family members consistently refused. Local reports later suggest that the family might have been trying to avoid extra financial cost or just preferred a natural birth due to tradition. The victim, she was trapped in unbearable long hours of physical pain, and realizing that she had zero legal control over her own self, she jumped from the window of the hospital. Both her and her child instantly died. She didn't die because someone wanted to kill her. She didn't die because she was caught in a tragic accident. She died because the people who were supposed to be there for her weren't. In a lot of my previous cases, or let's just say all of them, there was always a victim or multiple victims, and then there was a suspect, someone who committed the crime. Here, there's none of that. The family members and the husband cannot be legally charged, yet someone is still dead. Not because she wanted to be dead, but because the system around her didn't allow for anything else. Moving on from this devastating tragedy, next we have the case of Saman Abbas, a 18-year-old Pakistani teenager. This one is a devastatingly well-documented example of a young woman murdered by her own family for refusing a forced marriage. Her death exposed a global reality of so-called honor killings happening within immigrant communities abroad. Though the structural depth of this crisis remains heavily under-discussed outside of local Italian and regional media. Saman's family migrated from Pakistan to a farm town in Novellara in northern Italy. She grew older, which started a violent crash between her modern desire for an independent life and her family's strict traditional demands. In 2022, her family had demanded that she goes back to Pakistan to go marry a cousin. She very obviously flatly refused. Fearing for her safety, Samara turned to Italian social services. While she was still a minor, she was placed in a secure shelter home and formally reported her parents to the police. In April 2021, believing she could safely retrieve her legal documents to start a new life, Saman briefly returned to the family's home. It was obviously a trap. Surveillance footage from the family's farm captured her parents walking onto the field, with her late at night only to return without her. An extensive police investigation happened later, which revealed that her mother, father, uncle, and cousins had conspired to strangle her. Her body was buried under a nearby farmhouse and was not discovered until late 2022. Then, in December 2023, an Italian court sentenced her father and mother to life in prison, her uncle to 14 years. Her mother had fled to Pakistan immediately after the crime, but was eventually extradited back to Italy to face justice. Well, Saman's case eventually did make European headlines because it happened in Italy. Hundreds of identical tragedies happen entirely in the dark every year. Human rights groups like Human Rights Watch estimated that over 1,000 women are murdered in honor killings annually in Pakistan alone, with hundreds more across the Middle East and North Africa. This isn't just something that happens in one set place. It happens everywhere. These cases that are kept out of global spotlight due to specific patterns or systematic silence. When a girl is killed for refusing a marriage, the local community often views the family as victims of the daughter's rebellion, which I'm going to have to pause here and say is absolutely ridiculous. Neighbors, relatives, and local tribe elders actively try and cover up the crime, reporting the death to authorities as a sudden illness or a household accident, or even a runaway suicide. In many legal systems, honor killings are treated as private family matters. Under certain traditional legal frameworks, if the head of the family pardons the murderer, who is usually another family member like a brother or an uncle, the state allows the killer to walk free without any jail time at all. Nothing. No punishment. Not at all for taking someone else's life. To prevent human rights organizations from tracking down the data, families bury the victims hastily in unmarked graves, without obtaining official death certificates or medical autopsies. Murder is murder and killing is killing. There is nothing honorable about it. There should always be a price to pay for taking away someone else's life. Every human is valuable, and one does not have the power to take something else, especially their life, away from someone else. In our next case, we have Yanar Mohammed. This wonderful woman spent decades fighting for the fundamental human rights and legal equalities of women in Iraq. As a co-founder and director of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq, her life's work directly challenges the patriarchal and extremist control over women. In a country where the state does not provide a safe house for women fleeing domestic violence, Yanar Mohammed established a secret network of 11 shelters across Iraq. She actively protected women, including Yazidi survivors, from honor killings, trafficking, or tribal violence. She fiercely led the public resistance against an abusive amendment to Iraq's personal state law, which threatened to drastically roll back in women's rights and essentially legalizing child marriage. Because she refused to stop advocating for bodily autonomy and equal rights, she faced continuous death threats from various extremist groups. An unidentified gunman on a motorcycle ambushed and shot her dead right outside her house. She was killed for speaking about something that is as basic as human rights. One thing I think that a lot of people find hard to understand is that the human brain is incredibly complex in the sense that everyone has different wants, different needs. Feminism doesn't take away anything from men. All it does is give women the same rights men have. It also doesn't take anything away from women who might want to be trad wives. All feminism does is give you a choice. And then after that is completely you. Let's say in a world where feminism was instilled in our legal system, men and trad wives would still get to do exactly what they wanted. Men could go out, be CEOs, trad wives could stay home, have children, cook and clean. Yet let's say in a world where misogynistic worldviews are set in our legal system, women wouldn't have a choice. Trad wives would be happy, men would be happy, but others who don't want that, including men and women both, would be forced into roles they don't want. Well, in our first scenario, everyone gets to choose for themselves. When a woman is assassinated for pushing against structural supremacy, her story is rarely kept alive on the global stage due to deliberate containment strategies. One thing I find absolutely horrific is anytime a woman is assassinated, or not even a woman, anytime anyone is assassinated for pushing the beliefs that protect groups of people, their death is talked about for 3 weeks at most and forgotten. Their life's work that they spend years and years building, and then their ultimate sacrifice talked about for a few weeks, then just never brought up again. People could attest this to social media being heavily controlled by governments, or simply the arrogance of humans. Authorities in volatile regions often classify the assassinations of female activists under a generic umbrella of general terrorism or regional instability. By erasing the targeted anti-feminist motive of the attack, the international communities view it as a standard conflict of chaos, rather than a direct war on human equality. Human rights watchdogs like Human Rights Watch note that local governments routinely fail to launch transparent investigations into murders of progressive female activists. When the perpetrators face zero accountability, there are no high-profile public trials to keep international media attention focused on that specific case. Killing prominent leaders creates an immediate atmosphere of terror. Local journalists and surviving activists are often forced into hiding or silence to protect their own lives, which chokes off the steady flow of ground-level reporting needed to feed global news services. Activists put their life in danger every single day just for the chance of an equal world. Yanar Mohammed's case reflects a broader global crisis where speaking out for basic equality carries a death sentence. Journalists like Malala Maiwad in Afghanistan were similarly executed by extremist groups, specifically for working as public female voices and advocating for women's civil liberties. Globally, indigenous women fighting for environmental equality and tribal land rights are regularly assassinated by private corporate security forces or local cartels, with their deaths framed as purely localized property disputes. In all these cases, the legal system failed not through a lack of laws, but through the deliberate gaps, institutional loopholes, and a refusal by authorities to enforce basic protection for women. Going back to our first case in China, when we look at where the law failed, the State Council's regulation on the administration of medical institutions, specifically Article 33, the legal frameworks treated a pregnant woman's body as communal or a family property. Rather than respecting her individual bodily autonomy, the law required medical staff to get signature consent from a spouse or relative. before performing any major surgeries like a C-section. Even though Ma was a completely competent adult, explicitly begging for surgery, the legal guidelines protected the hospital from future lawsuits by prioritizing the husband's signature over the patient's own life. The system cared more about traditional marital hierarchy rather than a woman's right to save her own life. Now moving on to our second case. The local Italian authorities had already classified Saman as a minor at extreme risk. They had placed her inside of a secure shelter. When she left the shelter to retrieve her documents from her parents' house, there was no proactive legal mechanisms or police escort to ensure her protection. Despite her family's documented history of threats, the system treated it like a domestic family matter. After the murder, the victim's parents fled to Pakistan. For over a year, the international legal system moved at a crawl. Her mother managed to evade arrest for nearly 3 years. And we're not talking about a highly skilled criminal. This was your average stay-at-home mom. 3 years due to slow processing and the historical lack of urgency when it comes to tracking down perpetrators of traditional honor killings. Now for our third case, it's quite more general, I guess. First, in Iraq, they have officially legalized domestic violence. Under Article 41 of our Iraq Penal Code, a husband has the legal right to punish his wife, meaning domestic violence is functionally decriminalized. Because the state's legal system explicitly permits this abuse, the state refused to fund or operate women's shelters, criminalizing the protector. Instead of protecting Yanar Mohammed for saving valuable women from honor killings, the Iraq legal system actively harassed her. The government threatened to prosecute her organization for running illegal shelters. Illegal shelters that were helping women escape from dangerous situations. Following her assassination, the police system launched no transparent, aggressive investigation into the extremist network that had threatened her and then eventually took her life. The system treated her murder with total institutional apathy, reinforcing a culture of absolute impunity for those who kill feminist reformers. Now, these are major acts of misogyny. Let's not even get into the micro acts, as they're classified. In all 3 cases, the legal system failed not only through a lack of laws, but also through deliberate gaps, institutional loopholes, and a refusal by authorities to enforce basic protection for women. Just like how basic protection should be given to all humans, I'm pretty sure women are included in that. Now, what is the price for demanding equality? For demanding a normal life? Well, me and many others who might be watching this video sit in a air-conditioned room. We might discuss political policies, but discussion brings us nowhere. Well, we sit here in rooms just talking. Multiple countries sign bills that actively reduce human rights. Why I won't say women's rights? Because rights are rights and they should be given to every single person. Outside, beyond the walls of our protected chambers, a dark, undeniable reality persists. Our global political architect is fundamentally corrupt at its core. Without getting into conspiracies about God knows what a lot of the political leaders of the world are up to, without getting into the Epstein files, without getting into so-called demon summoning rituals, we're just staying at the base fact information that we know. Politics at its current state is not an instrument for public good. It has degenerated into a self-serving, rigid game designed to protect power. Those who don't need protection still get it. Consolidate wealth and silence anyone who demands systematic change. Millions of people, not just women, men too, children, who decide to speak out against this die and no one finds out. And nowhere is this corruption more vicious and more lethal or more cowardly than in its coordinated assault on women. Today, globally, women who step forward to make a difference aren't just facing political opposition. They're putting their lives on the line. To be a woman with a voice, a woman with an independent mind, or a woman fighting for basic equality is to live with a target on your back. The price of female leadership is no longer measured in political capital. It is measured in blood. We are told that we live in the enlightened era of human rights. Yet our leaders fail us every single day through 3 distinct mechanisms of institutional betrayal. First off, the cowardice of geopolitics. World leaders routinely look the other way when it comes to women's rights. The rights for women are systematically crushed, trading human lives for trade deals, oil reserves, or diplomatic alliances. We watch global powers issue mild, toothless statements of concerns, while they completely erase women from public life. In Afghanistan, more than 100 edits have stripped women of their education, careers, and literally banned their voices from being heard in public. Yet the global response is an exercise in diplomatic apathy. Our leaders care more about maintaining geopolitical stability than they do about half of the human race. Our world leaders allowed legal structures to be weaponized against the very people they are meant to protect. In country after country, we see a refusal to dismantle laws that treat women as subhuman fractions of men. We see medical systems that strip women of their bodily autonomy, caring more about marital permission than the victim's survival. We see penal codes that explicitly legalize spousal violence under the guise of domestic discipline. I'm sorry, I don't think a grown woman needs to be disciplined by her husband. We see loopholes that protect criminals by forcing survivors into legal bondage. When activists stand up to change these laws, the state doesn't protect them. Instead, corrupt judiciaries use cyber surveillance, state-sanctioned harassment to break their spirits and exhaust their resources. The ultimate failure of world leaders lies in their tolerance for absolute impunity. When progressive women leaders, journalists, and land defenders are executed in broad daylight, the investigations are farce. Corrupt legal authorities routinely classify targeted political assassinations as general conflict chaos or isolated domestic disputes. By erasing the anti-feminist and political motive of these executions, our world leaders send a clear, terrifying message to the world that no one seems to be able to read. If you kill a woman who speaks out, the state will let you get away from it. Considering the magnitude of this betrayal, think of the grassroots activists running underground shelters for victims of domestic abuse because their own government refuses to fund them, while simultaneously facing state law prosecution for running illegal operations. Think of the young women who are cornered by legal and familial expectations, left with zero avenues of escape, whose eventual deaths are actively buried by local authorities to fabricate the illusion of societal honor. There is no honor in murder. These women are doing heavy, dangerous work that the world leaders are too cowardly to attempt. They are essentially staring down a gun of extremist networks, corrupt corporations, and entrenched patriarchal systems. They are fighting for the fundamental truth that women are human beings, entitled to equal dignity, equal worth, equal protection under law, and they are doing it all with zero structural backup. Our world leaders have so much more than these women do, yet they do nothing. We don't need another non-binding resolution. We do not need a high-level penal discussion or a symbolic photo opportunity on International Women's Day. The time for polite diplomacy was over a long time ago. We should call out the hypocrisy of world leaders who preach democracy abroad while enabling systematic violence against women at home. We should demand an end to legal exemptions that treat women like cattle. We should enforce strict transnational accountability for those who target, harass, and assassinate female reformers. To the world leaders who continue to prioritize political expedience over human lives, history never judges by the wealth of someone's nation, but by the bodies of the women that they have abandoned to maintain a grip of power. The political status quo is corrupt, it's dangerous, and it is failing. It's time to dismantle the systems that demand a woman risk her life just to demand right. We shouldn't accept living in a world where equality carries a death sentence. When we talk about crimes, we aren't talking about what drove a killer to it. We're asking what laws protected them, what politicians looked the other way, and what societal institutions granted their impunity. Why are we talking about this today? Yes, it is widely covered, and I can say with confidence that every single person in this world has at some point of their life debated about feminism. But here's the rough truth. What they think isn't imprudent. What is imprudent is the fact that women to this day still have less rights than men. We all are humans at the end of the day, and gender should not define what we are allowed to do and what we aren't. Anyways, that was the end of today's episode. I will say it was very different from my previous ones. It was definitely more politics heavy, since at the dead center of any crime lies laws. Good or bad, they remain. And as long as they do, the dead center of our archive will always continue to grow. Because at the Blxck Archive, we believe that true crime is a political report card. Every unsolved, unreported file is just proof of a policy that failed, a system that is corrupted, or a world leader who is compromised. Anyway, stay sharp, stay questioning, and I will see you in the next file.